The stars in the Kethsolara corridor were quiet. They had always been quiet. For thousands of years, no one had cared about this stretch of deep space, a long, dark band between two star clusters, rich in dark matter deposits that most galactic powers had deemed too difficult to harvest. But humanity had looked at this corridor and seen something different. They had seen a door. And so, 11 years ago, they had walked through it, claimed it, and started building. Nobody noticed, nobody cared. Earth was new to the galaxy. 11 star systems. A few billion people spread across colonies that older civilizations considered small and unremarkable. The Galactic Dominion, a massive empire that controlled over 4,000 star systems, had looked at humanity once, filed a report, and moved on. The report had 2 words in the summary field: not relevant. That was 11 years ago. Now, Grand Admiral Verathun sat in the command chair of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion Asterisk, and watched his fleet move through the dark. 2,400 warships stretched behind him in a formation so long it took light several seconds to travel from one end to the other. It was the most powerful force ever sent to this region of space. It was, by any measure, unstoppable. Verathun had silver skin and 4 arms, each one decorated with the gold bands of military rank. He had fought 40 campaigns in his career. He had never lost one. He had crushed civilizations older than humanity, species with more ships, more technology, and more experience. And he had done it all with the calm confidence of someone who had simply never been given a reason to be afraid. The Kethsolara corridor was his next step. The dark matter deposits were worth more than most planets. The Dominion needed them. The humans had claimed the corridor, yes, but that claim was a formality, a piece of paper, a flag planted by a child who didn't understand that adults were coming. He expected no resistance. Behind his fleet, at a safe distance, a small diplomatic vessel drifted in the dark. It belonged to the Thulian Collective, a neutral civilization known for observing and recording major galactic events. On board that vessel, a tall, gray-feathered being named Ambassador Chiron stood at the observation window and watched the Dominion fleet move forward like a slow tide. Chiron had covered wars before. He had watched empires fall. He had seen civilizations surrender before a single shot was fired. He had a sharp mind and a calm manner, and in his long career, he had developed a reliable sense for how conflicts would end before they truly began. Something about this one made him uncomfortable. He couldn't name it. The humans had no visible fleet. There were no warships on long-range scans. There were no defense platforms that any sensor could detect. By every measurement, the Kethsolara corridor was empty of any military presence. The Terran claim to this space was backed by nothing. And yet, Chiron had done his research before this assignment. He had read about humanity, not the standard Dominion report, which was brief and dismissive, but actual human history. Old records, wars and battles and strategies stretching back thousands of years on a single small planet. He had read about something called asterisk deterrence, about something called asterisk a trap asterisk, about something humans had done to each other, over and over, across centuries, letting an enemy walk forward until the enemy was exactly where they wanted them. He opened his recorder and began to speak quietly into it. Day 1 of observation. The Dominion fleet is advancing toward the first Terran border marker. No Terran military response has been detected. I note this does not mean there is no response prepared. He paused, watching the stars. Humans are strange. In my experience, civilizations that cannot defend themselves make noise. They protest loudly. They appeal to councils. They send desperate messages. The Terrans have done none of these things. They have been quiet since the fleet departed Dominion space 3 weeks ago. I find that quiet more concerning than any alarm. He turned off the recorder as something happened. A signal came through, unencrypted, broadcast on every standard frequency, sent directly to the Dominion fleet and to every vessel in the region. It was not a long message. It was not a complicated one. It came from a Terran communications relay sitting at the edge of the first border marker, a small automated station that Verathun's fleet could have destroyed with a single low-powered shot. It said, "You are approaching sovereign Terran space. This is your only warning. Do not cross." That was all. No fleet accompanied it. No warships rose from hiding. No defense platforms powered up. The relay simply sent its message and went silent, blinking its small light in the dark like a lantern in a storm. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion the message was read aloud by a communications officer. When she finished reading, there was a moment of silence. Then several of the bridge officers began to laugh. It started as a small sound and grew, spreading through the crew like a wave. 2,400 warships, and the humans had sent a text message. Verathun did not laugh. Not because he was concerned, he was not. He simply did not find it funny. He found it sad. A small species trying to sound brave with words because they had nothing else to offer. It was, he thought, almost embarrassing. He gave a short order. The fleet would hold position for 12 hours as protocol required when receiving a formal communication. Then it would advance. He would take the corridor, establish Dominion control, and file the paperwork. Earth's government would protest. The Dominion's political division would send back a form letter, and in 6 months the whole matter would be forgotten. He leaned back in his chair and looked out at the stars. In the far back corner of the bridge, a young lieutenant named Evos sat at a data terminal. He was junior staff, barely noticed by the senior officers. He had been assigned to review intelligence files on the human territories during the voyage, a job that everyone agreed was a formality. But now, with the message still hanging in the air, Evos found himself staring at his screen. He had been reading old human history files all week. He had read about their wars, their patience, their way of making enemies believe they were helpless, right up until the moment they were not. He read the message again. "This is your only warning." Evos did not laugh. He quietly flagged the message in his personal notes, marked it with a single word, and said nothing to anyone. The word was, "Believe them." Outside, the Dominion fleet held position and waited for morning. And somewhere in the dark corridor ahead, in the silence where no sensors could find anything, something that had been sleeping for 11 years began, very slowly, to open its eyes. 12 hours passed, then the Dominion fleet moved. It crossed the first border marker at 600 Standard Galactic Time. The small relay station that had sent the warning was pushed aside by the bow wave of the fleet's lead ship, spinning off into the dark without ceremony. Nobody on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion watched it go. Nobody thought it mattered. The corridor ahead looked the same as it always had, empty, quiet, full of nothing but stars and the faint background radiation of the universe going about its business. Grand Admiral Verathun looked at the tactical display for exactly 3 seconds before turning back to his morning meal. There was nothing to see. More than 600 light-years away, in a station built into the rocky shell of an asteroid orbiting Earth's moon, Commander Sira Voss was standing in front of a wall of screens when the alert came through. She was a small woman, even by human standards, with short dark hair and the kind of face that didn't change much regardless of what was happening around her. The officers who worked with her had a private name for that expression. They called it the face before the door opens. She looked at the alert for a moment. Then she picked up her coffee, took a slow sip, and set it down on the console beside her. "They crossed," said the young officer at the sensor station. His name was Rael, and he was 26 years old, and this was his first real operational assignment. His hands were not quite steady. "Yes," said Voss. "Should I?" "Not yet," she said. "Let them reach the second marker." Rael nodded and said nothing else. Around the room, 12 other officers sat at their stations with the particular stillness of people who had rehearsed for something so many times that, when it finally arrived, there was almost nothing left to feel except focus. Voss turned back to the screens. On one of them, a live feed from a long-range probe showed the Dominion fleet as a slow-moving mass of light, pushing deeper into the corridor. She watched it for a while with the calm interest of someone watching weather move across a map, whether they had already prepared for. 11 years ago, when the Terran Exploration Division had first surveyed the Kethsolara corridor and identified its value, a different commander, an older man named Director HFY, had called a private meeting. Not a military meeting, a planning meeting. He had laid out a simple idea, built on a simple observation. Humanity was new to the galaxy, small, and surrounded by powers that would eventually want what humanity had. Not because they were evil, but because that was how power worked. It always had. HFY had said one thing that Voss still remembered clearly. We cannot outgun the Dominion. We cannot outspend them or outbuild them, not in the time we have. What we can do is outthink them, and do it quietly while they are still deciding whether we matter. The program that came out of that meeting was called Protocol Ember. It had no public record. It had no political debate. A small team of engineers, AI specialists, and weapons designers had spent the next 11 years seeding the entire Kethsolara corridor. Every approach lane, every subspace transit point, every useful path through the dark matter fields, with the most patient and invisible defense network ever built by human hands. Autonomous defense lattices, made from materials that absorbed standard Dominion scan frequencies instead of reflecting them. Mass driver systems anchored to small asteroids and chunks of ice, loaded with tungsten rods as long as a human being, and accelerated to a fraction of light speed. Subspace disruption arrays, buried in the floor of the corridor, designed to collapse faster-than-light travel lanes across a wide area on a single activation signal. And drones, thousands of them, small, cold, and completely silent, running on minimum power, floating in the dark like seeds waiting for rain. The Dominion's intelligence network had never found any of it, not because their intelligence was poor. It was, in fact, very good, but they had never truly looked. The corridor was classified as a low-priority zone. Humanity was classified as a low-priority species. No one sends their best people to watch something they do not believe is worth watching. Back aboard the Eternal Dominion Lieutenant Evos was not sleeping. While most of the junior staff had settled into the routine rhythm of a fleet in transit, meals, drills, downtime, Evos had been reading. His personal terminal had been open for 16 hours straight, pulling records from the ship's archive. Old human files, very old ones. He had started with recent history, Terran expansion, colony development, first contact records. Then he had gone back further into the long, messy, violent story of humanity before the stars, and the further back he went, the more uncomfortable he became. Humans had been fighting each other for thousands of years. Not just fighting, studying how to fight, building theories around it, writing books about it. There were names in those records that kept appearing in military analysis across centuries, old human strategists whose ideas were still taught in Terran command schools. One phrase from one of those old books had stopped Evos cold. He had read it 3 times. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. He sat back and looked at the ceiling of his small quarters. The Terrans had sent no fleet, they had no visible defense, and yet their warning had been completely calm, not desperate, not loud, calm. That was not what a civilization without options sounded like. That was what a civilization with options it hadn't shown yet sounded like. He went back to his terminal and pulled up the file on Protocol Ember. It wasn't in the archive, of course it wasn't. He searched for every record of Terran military development in the corridor for the past decade. There were almost none, which was, he realized slowly, deeply unusual. Programs left traces. Equipment left supply records. People left personnel files. The silence in the data was not natural. He sat very still and thought about what kind of silence could swallow 11 years of construction. He wrote a report. He flagged it urgent. He sent it up the chain to his direct supervisor, a senior lieutenant who glanced at it, sent back a one-line response, "Stick to your assigned files, Evos," and went back to his meal. At that same moment, on the screens of Terran Strategic Command, the Dominion fleet reached the second marker. Commander Voss set down her coffee. "Authorization code Ember 7 active," she said quietly. The officer at the main console entered the code without a word. And in the dark of the Kethsolara corridor, in the cold and the silence where nothing had moved for 11 years, 10,000 systems received a single signal and began to wake up. The lights on Rail's sensor board changed color. He stared at his screen for a moment, watching the pattern bloom across the corridor map like fire spreading through dry grass. "Commander," he said, his voice very controlled, "Protocol Ember is active. All systems responding." Voss looked at the main screen, at the Dominion fleet, moving forward, still seeing nothing. "Good," she said. She picked up her coffee again. "Now we wait for them to find it." The first sign was nothing dramatic. It was a sound, or rather, the absence of one. The low hum of faster-than-light travel that every ship in the fleet had been feeling through its hull for days simply stopped. Every engine on every vessel in the Dominion fleet cut out at the same moment, as though the corridor itself had reached up and grabbed them by the throat. 2,400 warships dropped out of FTL travel simultaneously, coasting forward on momentum alone, suddenly very, very slow. For 3 full seconds, there was silence on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion *. Then every alarm in the ship went off at once. "FTL systems are down," the navigation officer reported, her voice sharp and fast. "All subspace lanes collapsed, corridor-wide. I cannot find a single open transit point within scan range." Verathun was on his feet before she finished speaking. "Weapons systems." "Online, Admiral. All batteries ready." "Then where is their fleet?" He was looking at the tactical display, which showed nothing in front of them, nothing beside them, nothing above or below. The corridor was still empty. "Find me a target," he said. "Find me anything." Nobody could find anything. The second sign came 40 seconds later. The Vanguard, the 300 warships that formed the front edge of the fleet, began reporting impacts. Not energy weapon impacts, not missile detonations, something else. Objects moving at enormous speed, hitting shields that were built to absorb plasma and particle beams, not kinetic force. The shields held at first. Then they began to buckle under the math of it, dense tungsten, moving at 0.4% the speed of light, carrying more raw impact energy than most weapons the Dominion had ever faced. Shields that had survived direct hits from capital ship cannons cracked like glass under a hammer. 19 ships in the Vanguard went dark in the first 4 minutes. Not destroyed, not yet. Their engines were gone. Their weapons were offline. Their crews were alive but sitting inside cold, powerless metal shells, unable to move, unable to call for help, because the third thing hit them at almost the same time. The drones came. They didn't come in a wave. They came the way a fog comes, gradually, from everywhere, from angles that made no sense, from positions that shouldn't have been possible. Small craft, each one no larger than a ground vehicle, moving with a precision and coordination that no single mind could have managed. They moved in groups of 7, and each group had a job. One drone targeted propulsion. One targeted the primary power relay. One targeted communications arrays. The remaining 4 formed a protective shell around the others and dealt with anything that tried to stop them. They were not trying to destroy the ships. They were trying to stop them, and they were very, very good at it. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion *, Verathun watched his tactical display and felt something he had not felt in 40 years of war. It was not fear, exactly. It was the cold recognition of a professional that the situation had changed in a way he had not prepared for. He was a man who had planned for many things. He had not planned for this. "Return fire," he ordered. His fleet opened up, thousands of energy cannons firing in every direction, filling the corridor with light. The drones moved through it. Not because they were fast enough to dodge, they weren't, not always. But there were so many of them and they were so small, and every time one was destroyed, two more moved in to take its place. His gunners were shooting into a cloud. They were hitting targets. They were also not making a difference. 14 minutes into the engagement, Verathun ordered a retreat. He turned to his navigator and gave the order to reverse course, to push back the way they had come. The navigator looked up with a face that had gone completely still. The subspace lanes behind them were collapsed too. They had closed the moment the fleet passed through them. There was no way back. The entire corridor, front, back, and sides, was a sealed box. The Dominion fleet had walked into a room, and someone had quietly locked all the doors behind them without making a sound. Verathun stood at the center of his bridge and looked at his screens. 112 ships disabled in 19 minutes, more going dark every few seconds. His weapons systems were functional. His soldiers were fighting. But they were fighting shadows that didn't care about being hit, using weapons designed for a different kind of war, in a space that had been turned against them before they ever arrived. In his entire career, he had never felt this. Ambassador Chiron, watching from the diplomatic vessel at a careful distance outside the kill zone, had stopped recording and was simply watching. His gray feathers were flat against his body, an involuntary response in his species to something that the brain registered as deeply serious. He had covered wars. He had seen devastating engagements, but he had never seen anything like this. There were no Terran soldiers in that corridor, no Terran pilots, no Terran lives being risked. Just machines, doing exactly what they had been built to do, patient and tireless and without mercy. He thought about something he had read in a human history file, a description from one of their own ancient generals thousands of years ago. The best victory is the one where you never had to be there. He started recording again. At Terran Strategic Command, Commander Voss was looking at the numbers. 147 ships disabled. The drones were working through the fleet methodically, from the front backward, like a team clearing a field. Rail had stopped looking anxious. He was now simply watching with the focused expression of a person who had worked very hard on something and was seeing it perform exactly as designed. "Drone losses?" Voss asked. 11%, said the weapons systems officer, within projected range. Life support status on disabled Dominion vessels. They have approximately 4 hours before conditions become critical. Voss nodded once. She looked at the main screen for a long moment. The Dominion fleet, still massive, still armed, still dangerous in the way that a very large animal with a broken leg was still dangerous, was churning in the dark, fighting something it could not beat. "Bring the unbroken asterisk forward," she said. From a cloaked holding position 20,000 kilometers behind the kill zone, the TSNS unbroken asterisk powered up its systems. It was a carrier dreadnought, enormous by human standards, modest compared to the largest Dominion vessels. But it moved with a quiet authority that needed no explanation. It decloaked slowly, letting every sensor in the Dominion fleet pick it up at the same time, and held its position at the edge of the engagement zone. It did not fire a single shot. Voss opened a channel. Her voice went out across every Dominion frequency, clear and calm, with no anger and no triumph in it. Just the flat, even tone of a person reading a list of facts. "Grand Admiral, you crossed the line. Your vanguard is disabled. Your retreat lanes are closed. You have approximately 4 hours of life support remaining on your non-functional vessels. We are prepared to render full humanitarian assistance to your crews the moment you signal unconditional withdrawal and agreement to reparations negotiation. No further harm will come to any member of your fleet after that signal is given." She paused for exactly 2 seconds. "Your choice." The corridor went quiet. The drones held position. The unbroken asterisk sat in the dark like a stone, waiting. And across the galaxy, on every diplomatic relay and news feed that had been watching this engagement in stunned silence, the transmission played on a loop. The same calm voice, the same simple offer, no rage, no celebration. Just a door being held open, and a human standing beside it, waiting to see if you were smart enough to walk through. The High Council of the Galactic Dominion met in emergency session 4 hours after the Keth Solara engagement began. They met in a chamber that had been built to impress, a vast circular hall with ceilings so high that the upper galleries were lost in shadow, walls carved from black stone imported from the Dominion's founding world, and seats arranged in a perfect spiral around a central platform where only the most important voices were allowed to stand. For the first time in living memory, the chamber was completely silent before the session even started. 12 council members sat in their places. Most of them were old, experienced, and powerful individuals who had helped shape Dominion policy for decades. They had watched empires bend. They had watched species capitulate. They had sent Verathun on this mission themselves, unanimously confident that it would be over in a matter of days. The live feed from the corridor played on the central display. 162 Dominion warships, sitting cold and dark in the black, more going offline every few minutes, the drones still working. The TSNS asterisk unbroken, holding its position at the edge of the zone, not advancing, not retreating, just waiting. Council Elder Sothvaran, the oldest member of the body, and the one who had written the original assessment classifying humanity as pre-imperial, militarily negligible, sat very still in his chair and stared at the feed with the expression of a man reviewing a mistake he could not yet fully measure. Nobody spoke for a long time. Finally, one of the younger council members, a sharp-faced woman named Councillor Drev, cleared her throat. "The Admiral's last transmission was 47 minutes ago. He is requesting permission to accept the Terran withdrawal terms." Another counselor, a heavy-set man named Valak, known as a hardliner, slapped his hand on his console. "Absolutely not. We send reinforcements. Another fleet. We send another fleet into what?" Drev cut him off. Her voice was not loud, but it stopped Valak cold. "Into a corridor that they have already demonstrated they fully control, into the same trap with more ships. How many fleets do you want to lose before you reconsider the strategy?" Valak opened his mouth, closed it. Drev continued. "They disabled over 160 warships, the finest vessels in our armada, without deploying a single crewed Terran ship offensively, not one. The unbroken asterisk is sitting there as a communication platform. It has not fired once." She looked around the chamber. "I want every person in this room to think carefully about what that means. They could have done more damage. They chose not to. That is a message." The chamber absorbed that. Council Elder Sothvaran finally spoke. His voice was very old and very controlled, and what it carried now was not authority so much as the quiet weight of someone who had lived long enough to recognize a fundamental error. "How long had they been preparing this?" he asked, directing the question to no one in particular. A junior intelligence officer standing at the chamber entrance stepped forward nervously and read from his data pad. The corridor fortification program had been active for at minimum 11 years, possibly longer. The materials used were non-standard, specifically engineered to evade Dominion scanning technology. The drone systems operated on AI protocols that had no known equivalent in current galactic tech databases. The subspace disruptors used a technique of lane collapse that Dominion scientists had theorized, but never successfully built. Sothvaren listened to all of it. When the officer finished, the elder counselor folded his hands and stared at the table in front of him for a long moment. "They built all of this," he said slowly, "while we were not watching, because we decided they were not worth watching." He paused. "We made them invisible by choosing not to look, and they used that." Nobody argued with him. There was nothing to argue with. Across the galaxy, Ambassador Chiron's transmission arrived at the Thulian Collective's central communication hub 12 minutes later. It was a full account, every detail of what he had observed. Time-stamped and verified by the diplomatic vessel's independent systems. His final paragraph was brief and direct, the way Chiron always wrote when he was most serious. He had written, "Do not mistake human silence for weakness. They are not quiet because they are afraid. They are quiet because they are ready." The Kethsolara engagement was not a battle. It was a demonstration. And the most important thing about it is that they gave one clear warning first, and they meant it. That transmission would be read, copied, and redistributed across 14 separate galactic governments within 6 hours. In academic circles, diplomatic channels, military command rooms, and coffee houses on 100 worlds, beings of every description were doing the same thing, reading that paragraph twice, slowly, and then sitting quietly for a moment to think about what it meant. Back in the corridor, Grand Admiral Verathun sat alone in his command chair. His bridge officers were at their stations, but there was nothing left to do. The drones had gone still, holding position, not attacking further. The unbroken asterisk waited. The clock on his life support display for the disabled vessels read 2 hours and 11 minutes. He opened a private channel, not to the council, not to his officers, directly to the unbroken asterisk, to the Terran commander who had spoken with such complete calm and offered him a door. "Commander Voss," he said, his voice was level, the voice of a professional acknowledging another professional. "I have one question, off the record." There was a pause of several seconds. Then Voss's voice came back. "Go ahead, Admiral." Verathun looked out at the dark corridor, at the space that had been turned against him by minds he had never taken seriously. "How long?" he asked. "How long were you waiting for us?" There was no hesitation in her answer, no gloating, no anger, just those words delivered in the same flat, certain tone as everything else she had said. "Since the day you called us insignificant." Verathun sat with that for a moment. He thought about the report his empire had written 11 years ago. 2 words, not relevant. He thought about the 11 years of quiet construction that those 2 words had made possible. He thought about the warning his fleet had been given at the border, calm, simple, certain, and the way his officers had laughed. He wondered briefly if any Terran officer had laughed at any point in this entire affair. He did not think they had. He opened the fleet-wide channel and gave the order to accept Terran terms. The signal went out to every ship. Then he sent the formal withdrawal acknowledgement to Voss. At Strategic Command, Voss received the signal. She looked at it for a moment, then nodded once to Rael, who began the process of opening the retreat lanes and dispatching the emergency support drones to the disabled vessels. She did not celebrate. She did not make a speech. She picked up her coffee, found it had gone cold, and went to get a fresh one. In the High Council chamber, Councillor Valek stared at the feed as the Dominion fleet began its slow withdrawal, and said nothing. His face was the face of a man reassembling a world view that had just been taken apart and handed back to him in pieces. Sothvaren watched beside him, old and quiet and carrying the particular weight of someone who had been the one to write the words, "not relevant," into a report 11 years ago, and who now understood completely and without any room for argument that those had been the most expensive 2 words he had ever written. Outside, in the dark of the corridor, the last Dominion ship passed back over the border marker. The drones folded back into their dormant positions. The mass drivers relocked. The corridor went quiet again. and humanity went back to work. 6 months passed. The galaxy, in those 6 months, did not stay quiet. News traveled fast between star systems, and what had happened in the Kethsolara corridor traveled faster than most. Every government, every military council, every intelligence division on every inhabited world had pulled up the recordings within 48 hours of the event. Most of them had watched it more than once. Some of them had watched it many times, pausing on specific moments, rewinding, studying the details the way you study something you want to understand before it becomes important to you personally. There were a lot of conversations happening in a lot of rooms across the galaxy. Most of them started the same way, and most of them ended with a version of the same conclusion. Humanity needed to be taken seriously. Not feared exactly, at least, that was what most governments told themselves, but respected, and watched, and never, under any circumstances, ignored. The Dominion handled its side of things the way large, proud empires always handle humiliation, slowly, painfully, and with a great deal of internal argument before reaching anything resembling a decision. The hardliner faction, led by Councillor Valak, had pushed for 3 more weeks of demands and delays after Verathun's fleet returned. He had called it a temporary setback. He had proposed counter-strategies. He had given long speeches about Dominion honor. The rest of the council had listened. Then they had signed the Kethsolara Accord. The terms were not gentle. The Dominion withdrew all territorial claims to the corridor. They paid reparations, a figure that was large enough to fund Terran colonial expansion for 2 full decades. They released political prisoners from 3 civilizations they had been slowly absorbing over the past 30 years. Civilizations that had been too small to matter to anyone, until humanity had made their release a condition of the agreement. And they submitted, for the first time in their history, to an independent review of their border expansion activities by a neutral galactic body. Nobody said out loud that humanity had forced all of this. Everyone knew it. Valak resigned from the council 3 weeks after the accord was signed. He gave a short public statement in which he described his departure as a personal decision made in the interest of the Dominion's future. It was the most widely disbelieved public statement in Dominion history. On the day he resigned, someone placed a small copy of Terran Strategic Command's original warning message on his office desk. Nobody claimed responsibility. Nobody was surprised. The Galactic conclave invitation arrived at Terran Strategic Command on a Tuesday. It came through formal diplomatic channels, a full, signed, sealed communication from the conclave secretariat, bearing the marks of all 114 member civilizations. Earth had applied for conclave membership twice before, in its early years of space travel. Both times, the application had been declined on the grounds that humanity did not yet meet the threshold of demonstrated galactic significance. This time, there was no review board, no waiting period, no period of probation. The invitation offered immediate admission as a Tier 1 sovereign power, the highest standing available to any member. It was the classification given to civilizations that the conclave recognized as capable of shaping galactic events. There were 11 other Tier 1 members. The youngest of them had held the status for 300 years. Humanity had been in space for less than 200. The vote on the invitation had been unanimous. Even the Dominion-aligned members had voted yes. Some of them, by all accounts, had voted very quickly and without making eye contact with anyone. The formal admission ceremony was held in the conclave's main chamber, a vast, open hall built inside an asteroid that had been hollowed out and pressurized centuries ago, its interior walls lined with the flags and seals of every member civilization. Hundreds of beings filled the gallery seats. Diplomatic feeds carried the event to billions of viewers on worlds across the galaxy. Commander Sira Voss represented Earth. She walked into the chamber alone. No escort, no ceremonial guard. She wore a pressed Terran Strategic Command uniform, dark gray with a single row of service pins on the left side, and she walked the long central aisle with the same steady, unhurried step she used to walk from her desk to the coffee station at Strategic Command. She was small. She was quiet. She did not look at the gallery, or the cameras, or the rows of alien faces watching her approach the central platform. She looked straight ahead. When she reached the platform, the conclave speaker, a tall, blue-skinned being named Vorin, who had held the position for 60 years, gave the formal welcome and asked her to say a few words on behalf of humanity. It was a tradition. New members usually gave prepared speeches, long ones often, full of gratitude and hope, and carefully crafted diplomatic language. Voss had not prepared a speech. She stood at the center of the platform, in front of the most powerful political body in the known galaxy, and she spoke for less than 2 minutes. "We did not come to the stars to conquer," she said. "We came to survive, to explore, to build. We extended good faith to every civilization we encountered. We asked for very little. We drew a line and explained clearly what it meant. You now know what happens when that line is crossed." She paused. The chamber was so quiet that the faint hum of the life support systems was audible. "We hope we never have to demonstrate it again," she said. Another pause. "But we are ready if we do." She stepped back. The ceremony moved on. Vorin completed the formal proceedings with practiced efficiency. The seals were exchanged, and Earth became the 115th member of the Galactic conclave. And then, from somewhere in the back of the chamber, there was a sound. It started small, a single pair of hands, quiet at first, then steadier, a rhythm, deliberate and clear. The gallery turned to look, because applause was not part of conclave ceremony protocol, and no one could quite identify where it was coming from. It was coming from a young Dominion diplomatic aide standing near the back wall. He was thin, with the pale silver skin of his species, and his expression was not embarrassed or uncertain. He was looking directly at the platform, and he was clapping with the focused attention of someone who had thought carefully about this moment and decided it was worth the awkwardness. His name was Evos. He had been reassigned to diplomatic work after Keth Solara, which was a much better outcome than the one he had privately feared when his warning report was ignored. He had requested this posting specifically. He had wanted to be in this room on this day. For 3 seconds, he was the only one making a sound. Then from the left side of the gallery, a Thulian delegate stood and joined him, then 2 more, then a full row. The sound spread across the gallery, the way sound always spreads when it finally has permission to exist quickly. And then all at once, until the entire chamber was on its feet, and the great hollowed-out rock in deep space was full of the noise of 100 civilizations acknowledging something they had all quietly known since the moment Voss had opened a channel to a disabled Dominion admiral and offered him a way out with no anger in her voice. Voss stood on the platform and let it happen. She did not smile in the way people smile when they are happy. She smiled in the way people smile when something they worked very hard on for a very long time finally lands exactly where it was supposed to. It was a small smile, a private one. Nobody who saw it would ever quite forget it. Outside in the dark between stars, the Keth Solara corridor was quiet and still. The lattices slept. The drones floated in the cold. The mass drivers sat loaded and patient, ready and waiting and needing nothing from anyone. And back on Earth, back on the small, unremarkable, late-arriving planet that had spent thousands of years fighting itself and learning from every scar, children were growing up who would one day look at the stars the way their ancestors had once looked at the horizon, with hunger, with curiosity, and with the deep, quiet confidence of a species that had always understood one thing above all others. You do not have to be the biggest to be the most dangerous. You just have to mean what you say. Every single time.